We're in a small village near Doncaster in South Yorkshire. I say South Yorkshire, kind of long term been associated with coal and steel, particularly Sheffield, Doncaster, these areas. But this part of the county is decidedly kind of rural. And the name Hooton Pagnell derives from a Norman chap, Ralph de Pagnell, who was a Norman, a tenant-in-chief in Yorkshire, and he's named in the Domesday Book as an extensive landholder. So he was probably a member of a Norman family which held land in the Duchy of Normandy, particularly the area of Calvados, and supported William the Conqueror in the English conquest. And him and his heirs would have been richly rewarded. And what we know is that in 1086, Ralph de Pagnell held 10 lordships in Devon, 5 in Somerset, 15 in Lincolnshire, 15 in Yorkshire, and others in Gloucestershire and Northamptonshire. So that's the kind of reward you get for backing William the Conqueror. That's what these French nobles were given for their support. It's not a bad reward, is it? But hopefully, this beautiful kind of weeping willow just in front of us. But in between, you start to get, hi, Marlene says hi to Mrs. John.
Hello.
You start to get vistas across what we call the Dearne Valley. We'll come and talk about the Dearne Valley a little bit later on the tour. You're cold. Do you want to go and get your coat out of the car? You can catch me up.
I've got it here. It's my leg. I thought it was sunny.
Thought it was sunny. Moan already. So, you know, we get lovely vistas down. So, yeah, so these French barons were richly rewarded. And, of course, this was lands that were once owned and controlled by English landholders or perhaps Norwegian, Viking. It wasn't that they weren't owned or controlled by anybody. They were simply taken and redistributed and handed out. So the land, kind of as far as you can see, would have all been carved up into these estates. So what we know is that of Ralph de Pagnell, from whom the village takes its name, in 1088 he was the Sheriff of Yorkshire, and he seized the lands of William of Calais, who was the Bishop of Durham, under the command of William II, who was the king's man. He deprived the Bishop of Durham of his lands, and in 1089 he refounded Holy Trinity Priory on Micklegate in York. So his influence extended all the way across to York, and he made that part of a French Norman abbey. So it's first mentioned in the Domesday Book, Hooton Pagnell, where it's called Houghton, the town on the hill, or high dwelling place. And actually it's not especially high up. We're about 250 feet above sea level, but I think if you sort of look across these kind of sweeping views across the valley, it gives you a sense of height and place. So I think that it is perhaps not surprising they chose this location to kind of build the fortified house, isn't it? Look at this group of weeping willows together. They're magnificent. Really is a fantastic setting. Failed wheelie on the push bike there. Really, did they try? I know they had fishing rods, and we'll come back to rods. We can talk about rods later on. Yeah, the horses Tracy says the horses have got coats on. It's so cold. So if we go in the village, we're going to have a look at the horses before we go. So it's that kind of place. There's a livery stables just next door. So this is why there's horses here. Livery, of course, place that people, keep their horses where they haven't got the ability to keep them on their own kind of land. So we've got kind of livery. But you see what I'm saying is this kind of view goes right the way out across to the Dearne Valley beyond. And then beyond that, we're into the kind of the Yorkshire end of the kind of Peak District, the kind of Sheffield, Home Firth, that kind of area. So that's kind of where you're heading over in that kind of direction. Looking rather brooding, isn't it, the kind of sky today. So we get the sense of being high up here, but we're not actually kind of that kind of high up. And all this area around here is given over to arable farming, and very little will have changed in this area, really in this landscape really for kind of 1,000 years really since the Norman sort of period. But as we start to head into the village, is that carved out to be a seat? That's quite cool. Let's go and look at that. I think there's a tree trunk here that's been created. I hadn't noticed that last time I came. To be a bench, which is always nice, isn't it? Just to pick out little oddities and interesting points of reference. September sky, yes. Well, we're coming to the end of September, of course. October's coming. I was like, yes, it has. Look at that. Isn't that interesting? I've never seen that done before. So this great old tree that presumably was part of the village for a long time has been carved out and is now working as a seat. But unfortunately, it would seem that the insects haven't kind of given up. So there's an insect colony that is gradually eating their way through it. So I wouldn't particularly recommend sitting on that unless you want to splinter up your bum. But this side, still largely kind of intact. So let us move into Northfields Road. So this kind of rough cut sandstone and the pan-tile roofs, I think, aesthetically for me, works beautifully. I think it's a kind of classic look. Those who've been on Ian Braisby's tours will kind of recognise this as a Cotswold style stone. This rough cut, rustic sandstone that I think really kind of appeals to the eye. It's a beautiful colour, don't you think? And the kind of the red of the kind of pan-tile roofs, you've got stone slate roofs as well. It kind of combines for a kind of really pleasing aesthetic. And a bit like when we've done kind of in Home Firth and other places like Thornton Dale, whenever we get this kind of a whole village built of the same materials, it gives us a kind of real sense of kind of local identity. And the exact opposite of York, of course, which is everything's kind of different around every corner. But I do love the uniformity, particularly when it's combined with a kind of delightful English rustic aesthetic like this. So, of course, it's all English estate. Most of these houses here you're going to see are 16th, 17th and 18th century, many of which still owned by the manor. It is a classic Yorkshire estate in that respect. But I think you'll agree, an absolute kind of delight. Love the stone. Cheryl loves the stone. Completely agree. Cheryl, I don't know what your kind of local stone is like in your part, but as I say, if you were to say Cotswold stone, this is the sort of tone, isn't it, that people are thinking of, the kind of colour palette, the kind of texture, this kind of slight red russety element within the kind of sandstone. It kind of really works, and of course a render that's been synthetically put onto rather than just a sort of fight with the colour that kind of works in. So, you know, coloured red sand has been put into it to work. So here is the barn of the kind of livery store on this side. Yeah, the barn, yeah, as Tracy's noticing there, the barn is half built of stone, and then the upper area, obviously. So we're talking about historic buildings. This is the manor farm. This is the first of the farms that kind of dominates the village. Very, very high, you can see. Of course, with these high ones, you originally would have had, you know, obviously machinery or ladders, bringing sort of grain and stores up into the higher levels, where often used for drying of grain and so forth. So it's very much a village built around agriculture, landholding, livery, animals. But as I say, it creates a lovely aesthetic, and I think this is fabulous. You often get this kind of view. You see the height of that Victorian lamppost set against the stone sort of late Tudor barn. A wonderful look. You prefer the redly shown to greystone? Yeah, Trees. I think a lot of people do. As I say, I mean, Cotswolds is sort of, that's kind of most people's sort of epitome, is it? Do you know what I mean? Of English kind of rustic design. This is, the walls will be very thick. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, we'll see as we go around kind of what they call mullioned windows, which is where obviously you've got like a kind of gap. And you can see obviously from this village wall on our side here. Why do you say that? It's about 15 inches, something like that. Maybe 40 you get 30 plus centimetres. So I mean, that's just your kind of your boundary wall. So that's indicative, obviously, of the kind of build and how it's going to be done. But this, I know, this manor house here is the farm manor house here is it is above the roof. Yeah, it's that looks fantastic. It's a really unusual aesthetic. I can't think that I've seen anything. Yeah, I mean, there's a pair, obviously, these Victorian lamps, but I just love that contrast there of the pan-tile roof, the Victorian light, almost just artistically just set. It's fabulous, isn't it? And we've got the rear now of the manor house. I know this is another listed building. I think there's about 30 odd listed buildings in this village. So you can see here we've got the classic sort of farmyard and associated buildings, but everything built in stone. So there's not a sort of sense of, oh, you know, it's only farm buildings, so we'll build it out of a lesser material. This obviously building material was extensively quarried in this area, and so consequently everything is kind of built of the same way. So it gives us a very, very agreeable kind of sense of everything being the same. So the livery yard here. So visitors coming to what is known as the kind of the prettiest village in South Yorkshire tend to make a beeline for what we're about to see in a minute, which is the Hooton Pagnell pub, which is called the 1903. I'll tell you about that. Reasons for in a minute, which gives us a frontal view of this lovely farm manor house. So many visiting the pub might not be aware. I'll come around here because there's lovely vistas. So here we've got the entrance to livery. People visiting the pub might not be aware of its rather unusual past. Gosh, look at the view over there. Again, down into the Dearne Valley. I don't know how well we can see on the thing. But took me together. It does smell a bit ripe around here, but again, you get these fantastic views straight out across. So let me just come round so you can get a view of. I think they've been liberal with the muck of late. It's a bit ripe, as we said. The fresh, or not fresh smell, whatever the opposite of a non-fresh smell is. But here's the farmhouse. Isn't it beautiful? Right now. Isn't it absolutely gorgeous? So yeah, so the 1903 pub, which you're going to see now, has got a really unusual past. It was once a hostel for men preparing to enter theological college. And it was set up by the vicar of Hooton Pagnell, who believed that it was wealth, if you like, that stopped the church from getting many capable and talented people in. They didn't have the money to study to go to theological college, so consequently, the church was deprived of their services. So he decided, good for Rubo, yeah, he decided that what he was going to do was just set up a hostel in the village to bring in young men that could train prior to attending theological college. So far, so good. And St Chad's Hostel was opened in 1902 in the village of Hooton Pagnell by the Reverend Frederick Samuel Willoughby. And Reverend Willoughby had, he made it his cause, if you like. These kind of young men from poor backgrounds that lacked the means to gain the education necessary to enter theological college and obviously go on to enter holy orders. So Willoughby gained the support of his kind of alma mater, which was Lichfield Theological College, and St Chad's Hostel opened in 1902. So it's just here, you can see the white sign, but a cute little cottage on the way. How pretty is that, Marlene? I don't know if that pushes your buttons, but we can keep looking. You don't have to commit this thus far too early. Lovely. What do you call? What's that plant called, do you know?
I don't have it. I have no idea.
What's it? Beautiful. It's going to get close.
Behind it's a Californian lilac.
So originally, the 42 young men enrolled in St Chad's Hostel, and they were stationed in various buildings around the river. It's beautiful. Anybody know what this is? Holy moly! Yeah, they're gorgeous. Don't know what they are, but oh, it's a bit smaller. You're looking for something a little bit smaller. Okay, it's a bit easier to manage. We'll keep that in mind. So they were located in a series of properties around the village, including the vicarage itself. Let's cross back over. So this is Rosalie Cottage, by the way, an 18th century cottage. Isn't that beautiful? So pretty. But Willoughby, the Reverend Willoughby, persuaded the local lady of the manor, Julia Ward Aldham, to fund an extension. So the building that was originally located dates from the 1780s, but the extension which now forms the main part of the pub was the extension funded by the lady of the manor in 1903, which is why it has its name. But another very pretty Gabe Lane cottage here. Let's have a look at Gabe Lane Cottage. See if this meets Marlena's exacting standards. What do you think, Marlene? Does that hit the spot? So far so good. So Reverend Willoughby has got, now big premises. 20 young men have got lodgings. They can come and live in the hostel. They've got a lecture room there as well, and it's all going swimmingly well. He's got the support of the lady of the manor, and around this point, actually, he allies the hostel with the University of Durham. So St Chad's College is set up in Durham University, doing terribly well, you'd have to say. And so this extension here, so the black and white bit here of the pub, looks like it's sort of Tudor or whatever, but it's not. It's the extension that was funded by the lady of the manor in 1903 as part of St Chad's Hostel. So again, beautiful stone cottages just behind us. Just everywhere you look, it's just gorgeous, this village. And my kind of favourite is when climbing plants up the side really just adds to the aesthetic. Absolutely delightful. We need to buy this village, absolutely. I think we need fairly deep pockets, but so this is Watchley Farm. And again, everything's just insanely cute, isn't it? So here we are now. So this is St Chad's Hostel. The older part on the left-hand side, we'll see in a moment. This newer part being the 1903 extension. So far, so good. It was all going terribly well. So, the vision of Reverend Willoughby was now kind of in full flourish. But in the following year, in 1904, Willoughby had a falling out with his partners, and for reasons unspecified, he left the hostel, but he did remain as the vicar of the church. And he then proceeded to ban the hostel having anything to do with the church. So it's kind of rather awkward. They're training kind of priests, basically young priests, but they weren't allowed to attend the local church. So it must have created some sort of bad feeling. And it just seems that wherever he went, sort of trouble and conflict followed Reverend Willoughby. And actually by 1906, he'd moved on to a new parish in the northeast, a place called Stockton-on-Tees, that you might, if dawned on, she'll be aware of Stockton-on-Tees, or Catherine, if she's on, we'll know about Stockton-on-Tees. But it seems that wherever he went, these issues followed him. People didn't like the fact that he was an Anglo-Catholic, so very, very kind of high church in the observances, practically being a Catholic in the way he delivered things. So that didn't go down at all well in his new parish. They complained about him. But actually, in 1914, accusations were brought by parishioners to the Bishop of Durham that Willoughby had been involved in homosexual activity. He was asked to resign or face a full inquiry. He opted to resign, and on the 3rd of July 1914 submitted a writ of relinquishment of holy orders, with a writ recorded as being related to allegations of immorality, in brackets, sexual assault of children and embezzlement. So the charges perhaps reflecting what had led to his sudden departure from St Chad's hostel. So were his motives for creating this hostel something more sinister? And that should have been the end, really, of Willoughby's career. He's been, in effect, defrocked. He's admitted to homosexual acts involving underage people. But bizarrely, he's then recruited by what's known as the Old Catholic Church of Great Britain. And this is a complete offshoot. It's not related to the Roman Catholic Church. It's split away in the Victorian era. So it kind of exists outside the mainstream of Christian community. And they appoint him as a bishop. He's the Bishop of St Pancras. But in May of 1915, only a year later, John Bull magazine, a kind of conservative house publication, writes an article about Willoughby and the reasons that he had been, in effect, defrocked. So basically, this Catholic Church then find out about Reverend Willoughby, and for the second time, he's thrown out. So, wonder what year they were built. Sometimes dates on the lintel. Well, have a look. So I know this side is 1780s, this is 1903, this is the kind of two sides together, this became St Chad's Hostel. So bizarrely, Willoughby is defrocked for a second time. So you think that's got to be it. He's got to kind of hang up his spurs at this point. But bizarrely, he just kind of carries on as he goes on. The Old Catholic Church summon a synod, which Willoughby declines to attend. He's completely, but to him, it's like a trivial inconvenience. He continues his mission. He continues ordaining priests without any official office. And he becomes heavily involved in the occult. And he continues to kind of act with impunity, kind of surrounded by his acolytes. The kind of Aleister Crowley-esque sort of figure, involved in kind of magic, with a K on the end, a kind of crossover between kind of witchcraft, sexual practice, and kind of extreme forms of kind of Christianity and Satanism. He carries on like this, dressing as an ordained bishop to the end of his days. He dies in 1928. So just makes you think, doesn't it, what goes on in villages. We think of villages as being places of respectability, quiet domesticity, and yet here we have, quite possibly, a religious hostel set up by a Satanist paedophile. So there you go. That's not a story you hear every day. But it may be complete bunkum, and don't be kind of thrown too much by that. But, we know that, it was certainly kind of problematic. But it's now a pub and a restaurant, very, very successful business. And so there we go. Not a story you can expect to find in a village such as this. But that just goes to show that we mustn't judge a book by its cover. Behind every door, of course, is a secret. So how's this for a cute cottage? I hope you're enjoying the sights and sounds. Be strange. I know they were looking and listening. You don't often get that so much these days, because I've been doing this now, 2.5 years. People are starting to get used to, I think, people walking around with gimbals. But just once in a while, particularly in these kind of village places, you don't. It's beautiful, isn't it? This is the old forge. So of course, forge meaning a blacksmith's cottage. Every village, of course, particularly one such as this, where there's a lot of horses. Absolutely essential, of course, to have a blacksmith cottage. As you can see over here, an old sign remembering of the. So yeah, from time to time you do get people that will look and be surprised that you're live streaming from wherever you are. But for the most part, people now take it in the stride that it's just part of modern life, isn't it? That we go on YouTube and we take you to nice places. But how lovely! He's all showing about the cars. I'm trying to get your eye line above the cars, but isn't it just a delightful place? Is it wisteria apparently? So that means we'll to come back next year when it's a rather dilapidated barn on this side. So we'll head down this kind of avenue down here. There's a fab war memorial down here, and as you know that I do like to bring you to the war memorials on this tour. So again, this one also could do with a refurb. So if anybody's looking for a project, it does look like me, says Mrs. John. It does look like there is a scope down there to kind of bring that one back into life. But Apple Loft Cottage next to it, so very nice indeed. Yeah, that's definitely a dilapidated one. So you've got a barn there. If anybody's looking for a bit of a project. Look at the red phone box over there. I don't see many red phone boxes anymore. So I do like to bring you to the war memorials on tour. I think it's important, and it's a reminder that for so many of us, it's just a permanent fixture. You're going to see in every town and village. I think there's 4 villages in England that haven't got one, which just goes to show how widespread the loss of life was in the First World War, the Great War. And most of them double up as sort of Second War monuments as well. But this one's quite unusual. I look at a lot of them. I used to be involved in the War Memorials Trust, so I kind of do know a bit about war memorials, and this one is unusual in its design. Because the thing with war memorials is actually they're fairly. Oh, look at this cottage. This is cute and strange at the same time. They've got some really odd things on here. It's kind of. This might be yours, Marlene, actually. It's definitely kind of name their house. You should name your flat. So it's definitely got one or two oddities. I did notice it before. It's very cute. Lovely mullioned windows there. Very nice, isn't it? But there's one or two slightly unusual things on view when you start looking through the windows. Skulls and. I don't know. It's a little bit. Let me just bring you up on this. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's not entirely. Marlene, love. Wouldn't change a thing, I'm sure. It's esoteric. I think that's the word that you look at. And someone was saying about stones above. This one, you'll see dates from 1779. I think you can see that right in the middle. So beautiful cottage. So yeah, so the war memorial is pretty unusual. So let me pinch that back in. There we go. Insofar as that mostly these things are fairly routine. Not routine, that's not the word I'm looking for. They are fairly ordered, they sort of follow a certain design. There's so many of them that there's not that much variation in English war memorials. So this one is unusual. For a start, we've got a life... That is not with people times. Yeah, absolutely. We've got a kind of standard sort of 5-layer plinth. But what's kind of unusual about this is they always have a cross, but generally speaking, they are a cross or a Celtic cross. This is what they call a cavalry cross. Now then, can you see up there? So cavalry cross is because obviously you've got Jesus portrayed on the cross. Now this is very unusual. I can't think of another that I've seen that has this kind of portrayal. It is not the norm. So normally it's very plain. But also, if we come around this side and take you to see the rear of it, something even stranger. Does anybody know? It's probably too dark for you to see actually in contrast. But what you've got there is you've got Michael, the Archangel, St. Michael, and he's got his scales. So for those that kind of perhaps aren't so familiar with the kind of biblical sort of depiction of the stories, St. Michael's kind of often depicted with his scales. And what he does is he weighs the soul on Judgment Day, on the day of your death. Your soul is weighed against your sins on the scale of St. Michael. And if your soul is too heavy, or rather if your sins are too heavy, you go into hell. other way to heaven. But for most people, they get a lengthy stint in purgatory. In other words, you've not done anything bad enough to go to hell, but you have, still got things to atone for. Now, this is highly unusual. And I'll tell you why it's unusual. Because generally speaking, we associate the war dead of the First War with sacrifice. That they were fighting on behalf of a Christian country in a just war, so therefore they would unquestionably get their place in heaven. Having the scales just of St. Michael suggests it's not necessarily that simple. It's a rather ambiguous statement on a war grave to have St. Michael and the scales of justice. So that is unusual. The other thing that's really unusual about this is it's tucked away. Generally speaking, almost every war memorial you see is on the high street, by the church, in the market square. It's wherever there's a lot of footfall, wherever a lot of people are going to see it, that's where it's located. This isn't. It's almost deliberately tucked out of the way. I mean, I think aesthetically it works really well. Let me just pull back so you can kind of see it in its setting. It's tucked in this, what they call Clayton Bank, this, I think it's called. It works really nicely in terms of how it looks, but it's tucked away. You can't see it from the kind of main street. So, yeah, I wonder that, Polly.
That top bit looks newer.
It's kind of really interesting. So, what we do know is that, of course, this being a village estate that was controlled and owned by one family, that had a very, very significant input into it. So, is this perhaps some kind of reflection on the morality of war? And the men who were almost certainly kind of sent others to death. You see at the top, we've got a crown. So what's that about? Because to me, it doesn't look like a crown of thorns. We'll come to the names in just 1 minute. It doesn't look like a crown of thorns to me. So is do with Christ? Doesn't seem to be, but hang on a sec. There was a popular phrase, or I thought like a little pussycat. Come interview us, come and say hello, and be on tour. Christocentric, of course. Well, it may be, Marlena, but as I say, it doesn't seem like a crown of thorns. It doesn't seem to reference really the kind of the biblical presentation. There's a popular phrase on time. I'm kind of riffing wild now. At the end of the war, which was said to be the war to end all wars, it was lions led by donkeys. And of course, what is a lion? It's the king of beasts. So is this the king's crown? Who knows? I'm probably being highly kind of speculative, but it's just unusual. I've seen a lot of these memorials, and I can't really make sense of this one. What we do know is that the walled Adams, the landowners, the estate holders would of course have had a major role in the design and placing. In fact, they may well have paid for it all. So, it certainly must have got the approval of the family. We know that there are 4 names from the First World War. So again, actually, as villagers go, that's not actually so many. 4 out of the population of about 200, I'm sure they were known by everybody, they may well have worked on the estate, but it's not a tremendously high list. So it's a very, very grand, very unusual memorial to a relatively small number, thankfully, of loss of lives. But as I say, if we think that the walled dams were closely associated with it, it's notable that over here we see the name from this time from the Second World War, 1939-1945, the name of Geoffrey St Andrew Ward Oldham, who was the second son of Colonel and Mrs Ward Oldham of Hooton Pagnell Hall. So he was killed on the 5th day of the invasion of Sicily in 1943. His body is over there. So again, we get to see now some of the sandstone rocks in their kind of uncut state. The boulders is what's obviously being used to construct the village. Beautiful stone, isn't it? So again, imagine that a little bit in the grottos. You have Knaresborough. You've been down there with me and seen. Hopefully, remember what I'm talking about. I'm just going to get a drink of water. So yeah, it's just unusual that I'm not trying to be any sort of conspiracy theorist about this, but simply that because I look at a lot of them and I talk about them a lot, you notice when something's very different, and this is very, very different. It could be that Julia Ward Oldham, who was the kind of lady of the mountain, was kind of high Anglican, and that's obviously what Willoughby was as well, the kind of defrocked priest. So it may be that it's got a kind of a Catholic sort of style. But as I say, the scales, it's really unusual. I've never seen that before. So it does kind of raise questions about what it's about. But anyway, whatever it is, it's a wonderful monument. And as ever, we take time to look at them on these tours. We've got no way of knowing. So, where are we? Let's just cross over. Show you some more funky properties. Yes, I'll show you this cat again, who definitely wants to be on camera. Look for Yorkshire Scarecrow festivals. Still coming your way. Oh, fantastic. We will look out for those. It's a pretty little pussycat. So you've had your 15 minutes. Let's move on. We're safe to go. So the village, Hooton Pagnell, as we know, is first mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086. And I talk about the Domesday Book a lot, but for anybody who needs a reminder, the Domesday Book of 1086 was a kind of financial survey carried out under the instruction of William the Conqueror, William I, the Norman king that succeeded in conquering these islands and taking them for his own. We became, in effect, a vassal state of the Normans. It's not true to say the French, because France and Normans were two separate places at that time. The purpose of the Domesday Book was to establish the taxable value that each estate had. And what we know is that Hooton Pagnell was said to have had one manor of 10 carucates and 10 ploughs. So I don't suppose many of you will know what a carucate is. So I'm going to take a few minutes now to explain to you, which I think is really interesting, but you may find deathly dull. So if you do, let me know afterwards. But I thought it was interesting was I kind of had to research what's a carucate, and it led me to find out a whole bunch of stuff that I never knew about, and how medieval farming and ploughing still defines how we think about land and measurement, which is kind of really interesting. I think it's interesting anyway. So a carucate, of which there was 10 carucates on this estate in the Domesday Book. So one carucate was a medieval unit of land, and it was approximating the land a plough team of 8 oxen could till in a single annual season. So it wasn't so much a definitive area of measurement, it was almost like a time and motion study of this is the amount of land that 8 oxen and the plough team can get through in a ploughing season. Had different kind of regional names around the place and different forms of tax assessment. But all our modern land measurements come from ploughing terminology. I bet you didn't know that. Okay. So the carucate was named from the caruca, which is a heavy plough that began to appear in England in the late 9th century. So with the kind of Viking invasions, the Vikings were great workers of iron, and the heavy iron plough was completely a game changer in this kind of respect. So the measuring system starts with a rod. I don't know if anybody's heard of a rod as a form of measurement. Isn't it pretty? It's so pretty. There isn't an unattractive building in the place. So a rod, the measurement starts with a rod and goes all the way up to miles and acres using this system of measurement. And it's still in use. So the rod is a historical unit of length equal to 5.5 yards, or 16.5 feet. And it originated from the typical length of an ox goad, which is a long stick used to keep oxen moving. So essentially it's an early cattle prod, right? And there's then 4 rods in a chain. So if you think about it, what you've got, you've got a guy walking with the plough, another guy prodding the oxen to keep them going, walking on. So that's where it comes from. So it's a rod. So our whole system of modern measurement comes from the length of a medieval cattle rod. So 4 rods, so 4 of these 16.5 feet, become one chain. And a chain is 22 yards, or 66 feet in length, which it just happens is the length of a cricket pitch. Now, cricket is incredibly popular around here. In fact, in the church of the Millennium Window, a game of cricket is shown being played. It's huge in this part of Yorkshire. But I bet many people don't realise the length of a cricket pitch is actually measured out in medieval cattle prods. So why was a chain called a chain? The local school there, how cute is that? Well, it's because a blacksmith could produce a chain of 100 links to act as a measuring device. And chains and links are still recognised by surveyors as units of measurement. And of course, carrying a rolled up chain is rather a more convenient measuring device than carrying around 4 16.5 foot wooden rods. You see? So you can see why chains come in. But chains in effect just represents these medieval cattle prods. So a chain is still an internationally recognised measurement of unit, and 10 chains, or 40 rods, is equal to a furlong. And the furlong is still the distance that's used in horse racing. And you've got the world famous St Leger, ran a couple of weeks ago in September, here in Doncaster, the oldest of the British classic races. He's run 1 mile and 6 furlongs. So you now know, of course, that's 560 medieval cattle prods, right? I know you'll work that out for yourselves. Hope you're keeping up with pen and paper might be handy at this point in time. So a furlong which actually means what a furlong means is the furrow length. So a furlong is how long is the distance equal to how long an oxen can pull a plough through a field without needing to rest. Okay, so again, it's based on really what appear to be quite kind of random factors, but this became standardised. And it became exactly 40 rods or 10 chains. We then have a mile, and that comprises of 80 chains, or 8,000 links. And this is the system of land measurement that was used to the geographical mapping of the entire North American continent in the 18th century. No less figure than Thomas Jefferson enacted the Land Ordinance Act of 1785, compelling all measurements to use the chain system. Never about furlough. What, that it is a furrow length? Yeah. So, of course, a chain only actually need good, though, for linear measurement. So how do you measure area? Because you talk about land, you need to have area, don't you? So how can that be calculated? And this is where an acre came in. So an acre, right, is still an internationally used measurement of land, isn't it? You know, you still see today on a site's house with 2 acres, half an acre, a quarter of an acre. But did you know that an acre is the amount of land tillable by one man behind one ox in one day?
No, I didn't.
That's where it comes from. Isn't that? You can't believe something you can go through your life and never knowing that all this thing comes back to medieval ploughing and farming. It's absolutely remarkable. The difference with acres in the medieval period is the strips of fields were long and narrow. If you ever see a map of feudal farming, they're all long and narrow. They tend to point towards the river. Obviously, water was incredibly important for irrigation. So what we tend to get was very long, narrow strips for 2 reasons. One, it gave you access to the waterfront. The second was you didn't want to be turning your plough around. So consequently, an acre was long and thin. But when it became standardised, it became a square. And it's 10 square chains. So in other words, it's a furlong wide by a furlong long. That's an acre. And a square mile contains, you know this already, 640 acres, right? Which is equal to a very large number of cattle prods, right? Let's just say that. I don't think we need to keep going. We've then got the ox gang. You might have heard of lots of ox gang lanes that you see in villages. And that was the amount of land tillable by one ox in a ploughing season. So this could vary from season to season, from village to village, but typically it's about 15 acres. You've then got a vergate, which is the amount of land tillable by 2 oxen in a ploughing season. So our final thing, when we started, a carricate, talking about carricates, do keep up, was the amount of land tillable by a team of 8 oxen in a ploughing season. So this is equal to 8 ox gangs, or 4 vergates, call it what you like. So we now know that in 1086, the Lord of the Manor had lands that would have required 80 oxen to plough every season and would have comprised about 1,200 acres. Taking 1,200 man days to plough, because you know now an acre, right, is what a man can do in a day. So we know that medieval peasants, or villeins as they were called, had every Sunday off. So the working week is 6 days. The first ploughing season was 4 weeks in January, unless they'd planted winter rye, in which case it'd be in April. So a 4-week ploughing season is 24 days, right? So as we know, Hooton Pagnell's lordship required 1,200 man days. So that tells the village estate needed 50 ploughmen to plough the fields. It's good, this, isn't it? Maths, history and fun and beautiful cottages. What a combination. And Mrs. John here as well. Doesn't get much better than that, does it? So this is what I spend my time researching. It's no wonder my brain is befuddled, is it, when I spend my time working out how many medieval ploughmen it took to work out this estate. Yeah, it keeps me out of trouble, it's fair to say. So we know that Ralph de Pagnell, right, his lordship was one of 65 that he had, meaning that he had somewhere in the region of 3,250 ploughmen on his estates. Isn't that crazy? Let's have a look over here. It's gorgeous, isn't it? Look at the roses. So I hope you're enjoying this kind of I do try and cover it all.
What's a hectare?
Yeah.
Then, John? Is that
A hectare is a rotten decimal. So it's a metric system that came in to bugger it all up. Yeah, absolutely. We hold no trip with hectares and meters and hectolitres and all those kind of all that nonsense. French muck, yes, being forced on the imperial. So obviously ploughing was very hard physical labour. You literally sort of pushing, this shear through clay soil, especially in January. Think about having to kind of slice open England's damp and often kind of clay-ridden crust with a heavy kind of iron blade. And analysis of medieval skeletons, these roses, they're so pretty, shows extensive evidence of very, very advanced arthritis. And bearing in mind people lived much shorter time spans than we did, that suggests that very, very early on their bodies were in fact getting kind of worn out. But the medieval mantra was, the ploughman feeds us all. Everything kind of starts with the ploughing of the fields. Again, pretty flowers over here, aren't they gorgeous? And it kind of seems very kind of slow and I guess primitive to us now to think of, the heavy plough being dragged by the oxen train. But actually compared to other parts of the world at that time, the wheeled and iron-bladed plough of northwestern Europe was kind of supercharged. I mean, remember, an acre of soil could be kind of torn up by two men with the help of beasts, providing the horsepower, in a single day. And not only did ploughing kind of bring up the buried nutrients in the soil to the surface, the soil was enriched with the manure as the animals walked along and they did their business. That churns back into the soil, so you got a kind of fertility act going on at the same time. And the plough also kind of chucked out weeds that then would kind of wither and die, and it opened up the soil to kind of air and water. So it is all this medieval commitment, if you like, to land management that has kept this to be, an island to this day, that is remarkable for its qualities of arable. And it meant that a population of somewhere around the region of 1 million could be sustained. But of course, in years of bad harvest, they were instantly into problems because there was no other source of foodstuffs. So lemon character, thank you, Natalie, that's lovely. And Cheryl, thank you very much. So two men would work in tandem in the ploughing. One, I'm just going to wait for this truck to go past. So one would be behind the plough, keeping the furrow straight, because what you don't want is windy rows. To be running into your neighbour's land, that wouldn't go down at all well. And the other is walking along with the oxen. And it's known that to coax them along, they would sing to the oxen. Oxen like being sung to, apparently. So if you ever see a cow, it looks a bit sad, or you feel a bit, not quite sure if it's going to harm you, sing to it. They apparently like that a lot.
Genre of music?
No, apparently Mrs. John asking there's a particular genre of music you should look for when you're trying to coax a stubborn oxen along. I think chance, try from your playbook, maybe try a bit of Frank Sinatra, a bit of Ella Fitzgerald. I would start with something kind of, easy really. I wouldn't go straight in with the kind of high tempo stuff, and see how that goes on. And if not, of course, you've got your rod. You can goad them with your rod. And as we know, the rod is the beginning of it all, of the mile, the acre, the chain. All starts off with a medieval cattle prod. So I hope that you found a kind of 10-minute deviation discussion about our system of imperial measurement and its relationship to the medieval cattle prod interesting, or at the very least diverting. But I think we've probably had enough. I think we've probably exercised as much as we possibly can of getting at that. But as I say, what we're talking about here is a very, very advanced, what we call agrarian economy. A country that is kind of managed around parcels of land, around lords of the manor. There is an important legal principle in English law: there is no land without a lord. In other words, the landlord. Everything is owned. Of course, there was a lot of public ownership, sort of back in the day, but common grazing and so forth. But they soon put that right, and they put in place controls which stop people grazing their animals wherever they kind of saw fit. So there is just one other thing I'll mention actually, because we're kind of fast approaching it. Going back to the oxen, it wasn't just the people that got worn down by the demands of working life. The oxen also had a limited working life. And St Jude's Day, have you heard of St Jude? So St Jude is famously, it's rather unlucky, isn't he, because he shares the name with Judas, two Judases. So St Jude is the other one. So not Judas Iscariot, St Jude, the old school. Look, isn't that pretty? Oh, look at that, yeah, the fern in the wall, that's fantastic. And Super interesting. Thank you, Dolores. Super interesting. I thought it was super interesting. But then I thought, am I just being a complete train spotter by finding it super interesting, the relationship between acres and medieval cattle prods? It just goes to show that there's always somebody else in the world that finds it interesting too. And perhaps that is the joy and benefit of live streaming, is you actually find that person. So Dolores, that was all for you. So St Jude's Day. He's Jude, he's known as the patron of lost causes. You might have heard of St Jude, the patron of lost causes. Anyway, his day is the 28th October. And what they say is on St Jude's Day, the oxen may play, which sounds jolly nice to the oxen. I'm sure they must look forward to that. They have a good play on 28th. Yeah, disco. That's where you find out where the music tastes are, you see. You hang out on St Jude's Day, and that's the answer to your question. So it might kind of seem like a nice bit of welcome levity for the oxen. But actually it's a weather prophecy. Because what it's saying is it's about how the weather turns. So the final ploughing of the year was in October. And this is when you'd plant the winter wheat and rye, taking advantage of the fine weather that often prevails during the first part of the month. So early October is associated with very mild weather. So actually the weather we're sort of getting right now. And it was historically known as St Luke's Little Summer. It's a lovely name, is it? St Luke's Little Summer? However, the last week of October is one of the wettest of the year. And tradition says that it always rains on St Jude's Day. So the saying that the oxen may play is a warning to farmers to have completed their work on time, not to tarry, to get on with it. Because obviously St Jude signals the end of the ploughing season. So while St Jude's Day might signal a kind of well-earned rest for the oxen, it's chastening to know that actually the slaughtering of old and surplus animals starts very soon afterwards, because you're not going to feed them through another winter. And of course that's where your meat is going to be cooked, dried and preserved. Your Christmas meats will come from there. So whilst they may get a day of rest, it may be one of their last days on this planet. So I'll get a drink of water. They throw raves as KCM. A Tennessee hoedown, maybe? Who knows? Maybe they like line dancing. They'd be good at that, wouldn't they, cows line dancing? Who knows? You're on the ground in Tennessee. You need to go and find a rancher and ask. Ask what music like, KCM. So, we have the church coming in to view. And, of course, no English village is complete without a church. Interestingly, there's no mention of a church at Hooton Pagnell in the Domesday Book in 1086. And we do know that Ralph de Pagnell, who was the big landowner here, refounded the Priory of Holy Trinity in York in 1089, which suggests that his interests in the church were based in York rather than locally. However, parts of this church that you can look at are, date from the 11th century, so it's not quite sure why it wouldn't be mentioned. So maybe it's just shortly after the Domesday Book it goes into kind of construction, because the tower definitely, and parts of the walls are definitely 11th century, and the rest of it is kind of 12th century, so it's very much of that time. Just go up these stairs and then we'll kind of come up and have a look at the church. Hope you're having a nice time. I hope you're enjoying Hooton Pagnell, something different. Isn't that gorgeous? Sun's trying to come out. So up the stairs now, not very accessible. Can we check out some headstones? Yes, of course we can, John. How? Is there any particular names that we're looking for? So John, Karen, lovely folk from Florida, joined me in Yorkshire. Can't get that up. There we are. A few weeks back, a couple of months ago, and we did some various trips to Yorkshire villages to look out their ancestors, likely ancestors. So you have to remind me, John, of the names that you're looking for. We'll see what we can do. So yes, of course, let's have a look. So we get some very unusual building pattern, quite rough stone, indicating older Saxon church. Absolutely delighted. Is it 5 o'clock already? This tour has flown, isn't it? We started a little bit late, so we'll be okay. We start coming. So let's have a look at some of the tombstones as we go along. So we've got a Norman door here, by the way. If you look, there's like your Ian Braceby lots. See, typical Norman arch. Beckenby, Benton and Leckenby. Ah, that's right, I remember now. Beautiful. Look at this old door. Look at the hinges on there. Isn't that something to behold? It's the parish of All Saints in Hooton Pagnell. So let's have a little look at what we can see in terms of the graves. So we've got a Hannah here, the wife of Thomas Cooper of this place, who died in October 1850, aged 59 years. What I do know is there's a new cemetery here which was founded by the Wold Oldhams in, I think, 1901. This graveyard was said to be full. So the latest graves we're going to find in here are going to be turn of the century. But most kind of 19th century and older. So we've got William Crossley here, late of Doncaster, who died June the 5th, 1821, in the 50th year of his life. He was 49. And William Crossley, son of the above, who died in the West Indies, interestingly, from yellow fever on April 22nd, 1821, in the 18th year of his life. So I wonder what he was doing in the West Indies, age 18. Presumably overseeing some kind of plantation. So was William Crossley, was he a man associated with slavery? I don't know. Interesting. There are other Crossleys around here, so it does suggest that this is a family kind of patch. We've got Roscoe Crossley over here, died in 1864. We've got a Richard Crossley over here. So who knows what their kind of family story was. But quite typically, as you get, obviously, in villages, is you get family plots. So areas where you see the same names occurring over and over. So let's have a look at this lovely script on this. A little bit older, this one. So we have now, the tomb is sacred to the memory of Joseph Turner, who departed this life on the 18th of August 1809, aged 45. 1809, so like a Napoleonic era just there. So some really big graves. So you can kind of see that this is obviously a graveyard that was the wealthy local families. Of course, people without the kind of means simply wouldn't have anything like this to commemorate them. So again, if you try and do family history, it's an awful lot easier if your family were people of kind of property and value. This is Henry Worrell of Hooton Pagnell, who departed this life in 1751, aged 46. We've got another one. Let's walk over there. It can be difficult to read.
1750 or 40?
Where we're looking, that was 1756, I believe, down there.
That one there,
1760. 1760, I think that is. Yeah. So aren't they all? So this is to Thomas Selwood, I think it says. Yeah. Something of that. It's very difficult to read because, as you'll know, obviously, over time, the inscriptions do kind of deteriorate somewhat, so they become harder to read. But it's always, not fun's the wrong word, isn't it? But it's something intriguing, I think, about looking at these kind of, these was 1808, this one. And again, somebody died at the age of 37 years. So what's interesting, of course, is these are people that are more well-to-do. It's very unlikely many of these people would have driven ploughs. It's almost certain that these people would have been people that were either kind of in business, in the professions, landowners, people of means. But still, it didn't protect them. And the difference, of course, between then and today, as Marlene will tell you, I'm sure, clean water, antibiotics. Without those two things, people die of disease, communicable disease, TB and so forth, just in tremendous amounts. And your wealth doesn't protect you. Particularly if you think Christianity, what happens is you'll come and sit in a church. What did church used to have? Box pews. Why did they have box pews? To keep you away from other people that might contaminate you. So almost like through faith was actually, it was through celebration of faith, you're more likely to come across the virus that was going to kill you than you were through kind of daily life. If you were vaccine saved the most, absolutely, vaccines right across this. Marlene, sorry. It's all the same thing. In this world, they simply didn't exist. So consequently, if you got something that's going to take your life, bam, that's it, gone. So we'll come and look at the big graveyard. I was going to show you a bit of the oh, look at that, the gate's open. I didn't open it, so let's just have a wander down. Because we've got Hooton Pagnell Hall here. And Hooton Pagnell Hall is pretty darn special. It's a big wedding venue these days. So what we know is that before the Norman invasion, the estate here was held by Edwin, Earl of Mercia, who we talked about. If you remember, he was defeated at the Battle of Fulford in York, or his forces were. And then ownership was passed on to Ralph de Pagnell. So basically, it was like winner's booty, if you like. He got to take over the estate of the guy he'd beaten in battle. So Pagnell's name obviously reflects in the name of the village. So in 1190, we know that his descendant Fethesaunt Paganel married Sir Geoffrey de Lutterell, and the estate passed into the Lutterell family, whose arms appear above the gatehouse. So I'm just going to come in here because it's a wedding venue and it's kind of private, but isn't it absolutely? But you live every day, it's like you last, yeah, very good. Isn't that absolutely? It's beautiful, isn't it? Imagine sitting up there. Very good window for light, so quite possibly for embroidery. Don't forget, there's a time where your ladies of leisure would no doubt, want to be, doing things like sewing. How do you do that in low light? Well, you create a window seat where there's lots of light. So either for drawing or for those sort of close crafts where you need light, this is why they can design these kind of windows. So the estate remained with the Lutterells until 1406, and they passed through various owners before coming to possession of the crown during Richard III's reign. And the sort of core of this current building dates to the 14th century. And the association with the Ward Alden family, who still own it to this day, although it's held in trust now, death duties after the war meant that an awful lot of these properties moved, and I'm going to stand here, into kind of different forms of ownership. Really in court for you, absolutely. It's perfect, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful. But what we know is that in 1681, the then owner, a chap called Robert Byerley, negotiated the sale of the estate to Sir Patience Ward, who was the Lord Mayor of London. But perhaps because of his Lord Mayor of London, his kind of political, his civic responsibilities, he never actually made it to live on the estate. But Byerley wasn't kind of deterred by this, and in 1703 he approached Ward's nephew, Sir John, and in 1704 the purchase was finally concluded. So Sir John and his nephew Patience Ward agreed to purchase the estate jointly. But it seems that Sir John's involvement was only kind of provide finance, because it was Patience Ward who assumed control of the estate and came to live in the house. Now, before we move on, just to mention a footnote of Colonel Byerley. I mentioned earlier about the famous St Leger races here for famous thoroughbred racing. I'm not sure if you're aware, but all thoroughbred racehorses, their lineage can be traced back to three horses. And those three horses are known as, oh God, I've forgotten now. It's coming to me in a minute. Byerley Look is one of them. The second is Godolphin Arabian. And the third one, it'll come to me in a minute, it's another Arabian. And basically, they were all said to have been captured. So Byerley himself was a cavalry officer who saw an awful lot of action, and Byerley Look was a warhorse. It's in action, it was a cavalry horse. But he obviously knew it was very, very fast, very, very kind of capable. This horse, the best kind of, and it said they captured these three horses at the Battle of Vienna from the Turks. And they're kind of Arabic horses. And so he had this as his sort of daily ride. But when he kind of came back, he brought the horse back with him, and they began to breed. And to this day, every thoroughbred, so every horse that enters a race anywhere in the world, right, has to be a thoroughbred. And they demonstrate this by showing their lineage back through the siring, through the mothers and the fathers, the stallion and the mare. They have to be related to one of those three horses that were brought across by the owner of this house, Colonel Byerley. Isn't that nice? So if you ever wondered about thoroughbreds, what they are, it's the three horses. As I say, Byerley's Look was the first one. Byerley Turk, sorry, not Byerley Turk. I forget, I said Look, didn't I? And Godolphin Arabian and Darley Arabian, that's it, Darley Arabian. They're the three. So if you are a racehorse owner, you need to be able to produce the documentation that takes them back. Because if you're not a thoroughbred, you're not allowed to enter racing. So there you go, isn't that interesting? And it all happens, you see, in a little village. Imagine that, the stories we can find if we go just digging a little bit of time. And this is why I love just doing the research, because it's amazing what you think. You start thinking, well, I'm going to a lovely village, but what am I going to talk about? I don't know anything about it. So you do a bit of research, suddenly these stories just kind of fall out from it, and you think it's fascinating. Everywhere has got a story. So this is the local vicar. Yeah, typically vicars would be always buried in their church. Do not know that. Love horses. There you go, Marlene. Yes, they're all from three horses captured in the Battle of Vienna. And funny if obviously Byerley Turk could have been killed in war. He was just a cavalry, charging horse. So crazy to think, that he could have been lost, and the history of horse racing would have been so different. But he wasn't. he survived, and his seed, as you might say, one last grave, was Big Anne legend. So you go, Edward Newsom, late of Bulham Row. He died April 29th, 1845, aged 56 years. Also Mary, the beloved wife of the above, who died January the 4th, 1874, aged 88. So Mary did well. Mary, Trish says, one of my husband's 2 or 3 times ancestors, wife of farm labour, died in the 1870s. Only has a headstone in her son's moved to the US, made a lot of money, and then paid for a markup. Often that was the way, Trist, that in recent, later generations might choose to put down a grave to commemorate somebody who didn't have a grave at the time. It wasn't the norm. Having a grave or memorial stone was actually, a symbol of wealth and so forth. So, lovely, the church. So, let's go out through the Lich Gate and we'll go and finish up by... So, Julia Wald Oldham, who became like a major sort of benefactor to the village, she did... Oh, let's just go and see, before we move on, let's just go and show you the arts and crafts frontage of this. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we'll take you back down through. So we can't not show you that, 'cause it's gorgeous. So she paid for an kind of extensive reworking of the hall, of Hooton Pagnell Hall, which is just behind us now. So it now works as a wedding venue. So if you go online, you can actually sort of see the fabulous photos of it. It's a really lovely place. And I hope it does really well. It looks absolutely glorious. A really memorable place to get married. But I'm just going to bring you down here to show you the gate. I sort of tried to hide it from view when we arrived in. But look at this. This is your arrival. So if you come here to get married, your vehicle will approach these gates. Done a kind of Gothic arts and crafts sort of style. Come down and we'll go back up again. How magical is that? Can you imagine arriving? You could look on a horse and carriage, couldn't you? Or something very, very grand. Isn't that magical? It's like a sort of chateau entrance, isn't it? Almost sort of Disney-esque in its sort of perfection. It is... the heirs were cheap or poor. Yeah, being an heir didn't necessarily mean that they would have money. Often, of course, they've got the primogeniture, which means the firstborn, is everything will be given to the eldest male child. So to be the second or third child meant, in effect, you could be left with nothing really. You might get a title, but little else. So you'd have to marry well. Often second and third sons might join the army or the church. There was kind of roots in, but it was the norm. It was sort of winner takes all. So first child will take everything of the inheritance. So being born into a wealthy family didn't necessarily mean you were going to inherit. If you're the second, third, or even a girl, of course, even worse, you'd be right at the back of the queue for the most part. So let's go down through back through the Lich Gate. So sorry, John, we didn't find any Bensons for you today, but we'll keep looking, we'll keep visiting. So the money that Julia Wald Oldham used for this ostensibly came from, we'll go around the other side of the church, from Frickley Colliery. So whilst this land around here was chiefly associated with agriculture, in the early part of the 20th century, you're right, they started digging for coal nearby. So between here and South Empsall, the village of Frickley, which was also part of this estate, they sunk a shaft, and it was said to be a very kind of socially responsible. I think it was called the Carlton Main Colliery Company, kind of a model employee. So in 1911, Julia Wald Oldham set up a hospital, and it was very kind of progressive, looking after the welfare, educating people. So, but the money that came in from the coal was then used to really kind of do all the kind of renovation work. And as you can see, it's right next to the church, so they've got a lovely spot. This, by the way, is a Lich Gate. Oh, and during the war, by the way, which was about the First World War earlier, that became a military hospital. And Julia Wald Oldham became like a nurse and a matron. She actually worked there, tending the sick. So again, it's very hard to believe that given that role, the control that she had over this village, that she wouldn't have had a very, very strong say on what the war memorial looked like. So either it's a reflection of her Anglo roots, or there's some kind of commentary being made with St Michael there. Huh? Well, there's a right, apparently. But we know that rights are false friends. We're no more likely to be related to rights than anybody else. But nonetheless, first male, actually primogeniture, absolutely. So, does anybody know what a Lich Gate was for, by the way? It's an English Lich Gate. And they always look the same. They're always the same length, pretty much. Anybody know why? Do you know why? Yeah. This is where you would come, awaiting the priest. So when it's time for a burial, might be raining, you're waiting for the priest. It has to be the length of a coffin. So a lich gate was a place to shelter with your coffin and your grieving party, your mourners. That's it, carry the coffin to church. So it was just here for bad weather, for coffins, absolutely, you're all crosses. Look at these lovely gates, isn't it just pretty? I mean, aren't we glad that we came on this tour? You know, isn't this a special place? Look at this carving here. Really just very, very nice. This was probably, I would think, around about the same time, probably turn of the century. Oh, here we are, look. So it says that. Right, so again, look, here's this name. So, erected by Julia Ward Aldman to the glory of God and in commemoration of the 60th year of the reign of Queen Victoria. So, 1837 to 1897. So, it's just turn of the century again. So, you know, he's only just 120 years old, 125 years old. It's not especially old. But, of course, it's an English Gothic country style. And every opportunity has been taken. You got one in Irvington, lovely, Elizabeth, has been taken just to add little flourishes, little delicate bits. But again, I can't help but notice they've got another cavalry cross. So this is obviously, now we're seeing a pattern forming here. Not typical, you're not always going to find this on an Anglican church. You see, you're very much the Catholic territory here. So it says to me that Julia Ward Aldman was definitely at the high Anglican end of her faith. Because this is, you know, this is her. She's built this. There's no way that's going to go there if she didn't want it. It's quite unusual. So again, like the cross with the cavalry cross, St Michael, it's saying to me this really is a person who's a Catholic who is obviously for whatever reason deciding to dress herself up as an Anglican. But there we go. That's just my surmising. Some more beautiful buildings. We're nearly at the end of this tour, which is a shame. But I'm glad you're loving it, Roland. It's an absolute delight to be with you, and how quiet and peaceful it is. Beautiful. If I wasn't talking, look at these lovely stone mullioned windows. Can I shut up? Yes, somebody just tell me to shut up. So I know. The Holly Cottage over here. I hope by now, Marlene, you've at least got a short list. If you haven't already decided which one is for you, I dare say they've all. This one, now this is absolutely delightful. I like this one over here. This to me it's got it all. I don't know why. When I saw this, I was here about 3 weeks ago, signal testing. This one here, I really like this one. It's got bay windows, so slightly more elaborate. We've got keystones over the door, so a little bit more kind of decoration. It's one. Do you like that one? Does that work for us?
That'll do.
The mysterious. Oh, you like the mysterious one, of course. Yeah, I thought you'd like this one. Look at that, how cute is that little side extension? Look, you see. If you like, probably a dairy or buttery, that sort of function. Again, just look at this. For a classic English village layout, I mean, it's perfect, isn't it? Have you seen a single building that hasn't melted you? It's just absolutely delightful. You would not believe that we are in South Yorkshire. We're near Doncaster. That's not against Doncaster. I'm not saying that in a negative way. Doncaster's got its joys, but you associate Doncaster with kind of mining, do you know what I mean, and post-industrial, and it's urban and kind of built up in railways, of course, train building. We don't sort of associate it with the countryside, but of course it is. It's surrounded by the area. So we'll look at that area in just a minute. Before we just do, I want to just tell you about the cross, or what remains of the cross. So in 1254, the village of Hooton Pagnell was given a royal charter, and what that meant was it could hold a market. You know, we talk about markets quite a lot. Market cross. You couldn't hold a market without a cross, without permission, given usually by royalty or a bishop or an archbishop. If you didn't have this, they could rightfully seize all the revenues that you got. So you had to. It was a right to hold a market, and you erected a market cross to demonstrate the right. So the market cross over here, in the shadow of the church, this is the centre of the village. This is where the war memorial should be. Okay? Think about it, going back to why is he tucked over down there? This is where the memorial should be. So it entitled them to hold a market every Thursday and an annual 3-day fair. So every year. And what was here before was what they call a buttercross. Cross over. Look at that, how cute is that? It's just glorious, isn't it? I'll tell you what reminds me, if those have been to Castleton, does anybody know Castleton? It's a village in kind of the Derbyshire Dales. So the bottom of South Yorkshire, Derbyshire. Absolutely beautiful. Reminds me an awful lot of that. So Buttercross, sorry, right in the picture. The Buttercross, which is here, was the base, and a Buttercross basically was a butter market. So what would happen is people would come here and sell dairy products, and they'd be laid out on the steps in medieval times. So people would come from the neighbouring villages, butter, milk and eggs, the fresh produce would have been laid out here. So Elizabeth asked about the population. The population at the last census was about 200 in this village. So it won't have changed all that much throughout history. Very, very small. So you can see here, by the sign up, in 1253 a market charter was granted by Henry III to Geoffrey Lutterell of Hooton Pagnell to mark the granting of this charter of the Buttercross. And this cross was erected in 1540 and 1550. So this here is our kind of Buttercross. But we know that the market ceased to kind of exist after not too long a period, but they brought it back. So the very first Sunday in July, so perhaps we'll come back next July and we'll have a look at the new market. So I thought we'd kind of finish off here looking out across the kind of Dearne Valley and just think for a moment about transformation. So Frickley Colliery, which was a huge employer in this area, was closed down. In October 1992, Frickley, South Elmston Colliery, was one of 31 collieries intended to be closed by the government. It was given a temporary reprieve for 13 months because it was found that Frickley Colliery, this one had been set up to be very much focused on the needs of the workers, was, believe it or not, the most profitable in British coal. In other words, you look after your people, and guess what happens? You have success. The workers were given a ballot, but they felt it was kind of a no-win situation of basically voting for it to close quickly with a lot of money or close slowly with potentially a lot less money. So it's a kind of no-win situation. So in November 1993, the ballot succeeded. People just simply felt, well, let's get as much money as we can. So despite having kind of plentiful and easily accessible reserves, the pit closed on the 26th of November 1993, leaving massive social and economic problems in the local area. In its heyday in the 1930s, the colliery had employed 4,000 men and boys, although this was down to 735 when it closed in the 1990s. And to this day, Frickley, which is just over the other side, lives on in many people's hearts and minds. Frickley Athletic is a famous sort of giant-killing football team. But more about this, when we look now across the Dearne Valley, this is an area that until very, very recently had coal mines all over the place. And what we're seeing as the coal mines kind of closed down is a re-naturising of it. So big nature parks are being set up across South Yorkshire. You might just be able to see in the distance there, you've got the turbines, a wind turbine going around there. So quite typical, using this kind of new area that's kind of been given back to the country that was once this industrial slag heaps and muck, to be now part of the greening kind of revolution. So it is very much a part of Yorkshire that's in transition. Obviously villages like this that are kind of super cute and successful survive, but so much of South Yorkshire is still scarred by kind of the sudden shift to kind of post-industrial kind of landscape. So whilst this is beautiful, let's kid ourselves, much of South Yorkshire is kind of very troubled and hasn't as yet found a way through it. But it's hard to think about that when you're in a village such as this, because it is so pristine. It is so, okay. So beyond this wall, I hadn't seen this, lies a village pound that walled enclosed dating back to almost old. Right, so what this is then, this is animal choky. I've shown you one of these in drink houses in York. So if your animal was straying, they'd be round up and put in here to animal jail to pay a fee to get them back. So there you go. Animal choky.
There's a gap in the wall there, it's a bit of a
So isn't it lovely looking across the Dearne Valley? So you can't imagine that, can you, as a kind of coal landscape, but that's what it was. You know, we sit on a huge, and any of you, I don't know if Linda's still on, but she was in Pennsylvania yesterday. The same seam of coal that runs right the way through Yorkshire runs underneath the Atlantic Ocean and pops back up in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, that black gold. Yeah, the whole, same seam of coal, created in effect at the Big Bang, you know, with then the compression, do you know what I mean? And we know the things that cause coal to happen. But the same coal fields that were under here pop up in Northeast America, isn't it? Amazing, isn't it? So here we are now looking from the other side, we're looking down. So again, you can see what I'm talking about now. That is where the memorial is. It's hidden. It's not a usual place for a memorial. So, last I suppose, let's have a look at the red telephone box. If there's a telephone box in there, often these days they are defibrillators they put in there, the piece if you have a heart attack, because obviously the more sort of places without kind of great access to services, it can be the difference of being alive or otherwise. We'll see sometimes they're little bookshops or little sort of book repositories. Let's see what's in this one. And we'll finish off inside the telephone box. Let's see if it's a working one. So I think we'll come inside and finish the tour, because I've never done that before. I've done I don't know how many hundred tours I've done, nothing like as many as some of my colleagues. I've done a few, but I don't think as yet I've actually been inside a red telephone box. So all that is about to change. Oh no, it's locked. It's locked. My one opportunity to get inside a red telephone box has been, in effect, stolen from me.
Sit in the bus shelter instead.
So instead, let's just turn around and put myself in the picture, and Mrs. John with me. My hair's a bit of a mess, being blurred. With a red telephone box in Bank, yeah, absolutely. In Hooton Pagnell, and say thank you so much for joining us. We've run a bit over today, haven't we? 17:22. We started a bit late, so I do hope that you've enjoyed your time here, that it's been time well spent, and I say perhaps we'll come again next year for the market. I think that sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it?
It's summer.
So thank you for now. I'll see you all very, very soon, and thank you for joining me, and goodbye.